We have Shane Kiefer, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Plateau Land and Wildlife Management. Shane joined Plateau over 19 years ago and has dedicated his career to guiding Texas landowners on implementing wildlife conservation practices and improving native habitat in exchange for property tax savings. So, welcome.
Excuse me, thank y'all. I'm leading y'all into lunch. I'm sure y'all will be very particular about me staying on time. As Craig mentioned, I'm with Plateau. We work with private landowners. And our foot in the door is wildlife management tax valuations. And I'm going to talk about where that intersects with, in particular, Ashe Juniper management. But this applies to a lot of other things as well. But this is the avenue in which we'll talk. If you take anything else away from this talk, if you take anything at all away from this talk, actually, there's two things. One, we've talked a lot about incentive programs this morning already. This open space valuations, ag, wildlife, timber, and wildlife management valuation in particular, are the most significant conservation incentive programs in this state, in volume and in dollars. And so what this program incentivizes has a real impact on a large portion of the state. And something as simple as giving someone a credit, a check box that gives them a tax break, don't underestimate the value of that in getting what you want people to do. And the other thing is this program is incredibly flexible. It is not one size fits all. Right? This does not prescribe clear cutting, eradication of any species, any brush species, particularly Ashe Juniper. There's a ton of flexibility, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm not going to give you any background really on the program itself. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that after. But what you do need to know is that in order to qualify for a wildlife management tax valuation, a landowner must do at least 3 practices, 3 activities out of these 7 categories each year. The 3 you see highlighted are categories that managing or working with Ashe Juniper can qualify under. Lots of flexibility here. It's not just brush management. It's not just one thing. There are lots of ways to leverage Ashe Juniper management in this program. I'm going to give you some details on each of these, okay? The most common one, the one 90% of the time that we're leveraging Ashe Juniper management under is brush management. Makes sense, right? It's brush management, just like managing any other native brush species. It's an annual activity. You must do a certain amount in order for it to count. It's 10 acres or 10% of your designated area. That's important each year. Whichever smaller. That's important. If I've got a 50-acre property and I prescribe my designated area. So that's where one bit of flexibility comes in, right? Is I designate my area. Which areas are appropriate for brush management? Which ones aren't? So I'm going to focus on the areas that are appropriate. And if I've got 20 acres that are appropriate for Ashe Juniper management on my property, I need to do at least 2 acres a year. And what this does is it incentivizes landowners to take their time and adjust as they go. Because if I go do all 20 acres in year 1, I'm only getting 1 year credit for it. But if I spread it out over 5 or 10 years and work my way through and adjust as I go and see if I'm getting the results I want, I'm actually getting credit each and every year. So the program naturally incentivizes caution and care in how you approach some of these things. The other area in habitat control where we use Ashe Juniper management a lot is an activity called habitat protection for species of concern. This is often when we're talking about Ashe Juniper woodland systems, obviously it's golden cheek warblers or other neotropical songbirds that rely on that habitat type. But species of concern encompass a large number of species. We got a lot of species of concern out there, pretty much anything on the state wildlife action plan list, species of greatest conservation need, so lots of grassland species, pollinators. But for oak juniper woodland systems, usually it's golden cheek warblers. And I may want to use this because this is a project-based practice, right? And so maybe I do want to go, I don't want to spread that brush management out, but I want to go do some understory thinning, enhance that woodland. I want to use some of that material to protect hardwood seedlings and saplings, which are the long-term resource concern for those habitat types, right? Because I've got too many deer and I'm not getting any oak regeneration. So that combination of techniques can count as a 10-year project while I'm working on enhancing these critical habitats. Okay, so that may be a choice I make as a landowner or as a professional, say this is a better use of what you're going to do, and it's going to give you a better incentive to achieve that goal over a longer period of time. Erosion control. This is about using the material that you're generating from brush management, right? Ashe Juniper makes fantastic and useful material. And why? Yes, you can pile it up and burn it, but why? You got a lot of good uses out of it. These are commonly done in association with brush management for Ashe Juniper or other brush management practices. This streamside revegetation activity, this is something as simple as just small brush check dams, right? And this is not in, I'm not encouraging you to throw all your cut brush material into a properly functioning riparian area. But if you've got gullies, channeled areas where you're having trouble getting vegetation to regrow because of runoff, Ashe Juniper cuttings make a fantastic material to slow that runoff down, start to catch soil, start to encourage vegetation. Vegetation begets more vegetation, and so over time it'll start to heal and repair itself. That's a project-based activity too. And so it's not going to be just one little brush dam. You're usually looking at a series of these down an area, slow that water down, slow that runoff down over time and over a larger area to let it soak in and leave some material on the ground. Plant establishment on critical areas. Critical areas in this regard means highly erodible. If I'm stretching anywhere in any of these practices, it's this one, but I think this is a perfectly appropriate use of this practice. I defend it to any appraisal district that it's appropriate in certain situations. And this is largely about areas where you're having trouble getting recovery, building soil, there's not much else to do. You can use this material, sites like this, use this material to start to capture and build soil on these highly eroded slopes, often in Glen Rose formation stuff, highly eroded, slow to recover, may look like this property I was on not long ago. This has looked like this for 30 years. Hasn't changed a bit. But there are activities and practices you can do to start to build that soil back up, start to build that slope up. And Ashe Juniper slash is one way to do it. Windrows along the contours, rock windrows as well. Hill Country Conservancy just pushed out a publication on some of these traditional erosion control techniques using rock and brush that I encourage you to read. It talks about some of these practices, highly appropriate for wildlife management tax valuation as well. Okay. I'll also point out here, I'm not running too far, that when you're working in sites like this, thinking ahead about how to approach it, what to use that material for is really critical for a landowner, because the only soil that exists on this slope right now is underneath those Ashe Juniper trees, right? And behind some of those rocks, little bits of soil, little pockets, that's where you see some of this vegetation. There's not much there. And so you don't want to get on and completely remove this and lose what little you have. You want to start to build and work up from there, okay? Supplemental shelter, this almost always goes hand in hand with brush management, particularly Ashe Juniper, brush piles and slash. If a landowner does nothing else other than cut some of that juniper down where it's appropriate, where it's prescribed in your plan, and in some cases, leave it laying right there. Just don't pile it up and burn it, right? Stop working and leave it there. That can count as a separate activity. Or in areas where you don't have any low cover, you're missing that low shrub component. Again, often because of too many deer or past land use practices, you're missing that low shrub component. Build brush piles, right? I've already got the material, I've cut it down, I can use it for something else, use it for an additional benefit. It's a no-brainer, and it's 2 different activities out of the 3 that you have to have each year, right? Slash, again, can include just leaving it laying. It also can include mulch. I like forestry mulchers in certain situations, in certain soil types, in certain densities of Ashe Juniper. I've gotten really good responses, and that slash, that's the mulch that's created from the activity, gives me that second activity, that second credit. Landowners really like that. That's not an inexpensive approach, but if I say, if you do this, with no more work, you're going to get a couple of credits for that year. That's a selling point. Okay? Gives you erosion benefits, also protects vegetation as it starts to recover. Woody plant and shrub establishment is another one that it's just an alternative use under supplemental shelter. This is typically planting woody plants or shrubs. But if I've already got woody plants growing, and the only reason I don't have more is because they're being hammered by deer or livestock or whatever else, why not protect what I've got rather than go out and try to plant something that isn't growing there already? So use that material, use that cut Ashe juniper to protect those existing seedlings, saplings, shrub mottes, and give them a chance to get a leg up. Once they get above deer reach height, they're gonna keep growing, okay? This is a good example. This was not done intentionally. I don't think I saw this driving down the road out in eastern Uvalde County. This was a field of mostly old pasture, mostly weesatch. But they had, I think, just decided this is where they were going to dump cut brush for over several years. And this little pocket has more diversity in it than most of the rest of this 20 or 30 acre pasture does. There's live oak in there, there's bumelia, there's hackberry, there's all kinds of things growing because it's got some protection from this haphazard brush pile that's been piled up. That's the power of some of this stuff. They didn't plan any of that. They just used that material, intentionally or not. They used that material and it provided additional benefits, a little pocket of diversity. Here's some example photos. Slash retention here. This was a project on a property that we had done a bunch of mulching actually, and the landowner wanted to try something different, and we had a different situation here in that livestock still had access to this area, and we wanted some way to give that land a little more time to recover, discourage that instant heavy grazing. It wasn't the landowner's livestock, it was a fencing situation with a neighbor. So we left a bunch of slash there and got really good recovery in a pretty short period of time, 1 or 2 years. We did eventually come back and mulch this up. But while this was here, it was protecting those young grasses, it was protecting young shrub seedlings from deer. This is a site in Kerr County. Tried lots of different techniques here, lots of different management issues with Ashe juniper from really high quality mixed oak woodlands to some areas that did need to be opened up and treated. This is not our work. Should have said that up front. This is an example of what I generally wouldn't recommend. This was done, lots of issues here. From the tax valuation perspective, this landowner came in, cleared pretty much everything they're going to clear in 1 year, made no consideration for what to do with the material, essentially piled it up and burned it. They did leave some Ashe juniper, but it's lollipopped, and even the stuff that was underneath that isn't really protected anymore. And so really didn't do themselves much of a favor, because they burned their activity. There's no more brush management to do here, really. And they didn't use the material they had to get a credit in other categories. So just didn't leverage the opportunities very well in this case. So again, not our work. Last couple here. These 2 pictures are about remembering that in most brush management cases, in many at least, and certainly with Ashe juniper, the Ashe juniper is simply a symptom of past land use decisions and practices, right? It's not the cause often, it's a symptom. It's a result of everything that the previous landowners have decided to do over the course of many, many decades or longer. And this is a really good illustration of that. If you don't address the root problem, then doing the brush management, even if you're getting credit for it, for your tax valuation, doing the brush management's not gonna have the impact you want. These two sites are on the same property. They're a 1/4 mile apart, same soil type, treated at the exact same time in the exact same manner. We used forestry mulcher to grind down Ashe Juniper. This is 1 year post-treatment. No seeding done whatsoever. Nothing done other than the mulching. This is lots of little blue stem. What was there before was a bunch of pockets of KR and stuff. We found toe bush, fishhook, cactus on this side afterwards. Recovered really well, 1 year. This is 5 to 6 years after this site was treated. The only difference here is that there was a cross fence between these two areas and the neighbor's livestock had access to this side. And it wasn't as if the landowner retained heavy grazing. It wasn't a lot of livestock. It's just the neighbor's livestock, when they could, would come across the fence and graze this area. And so without any consideration for removing that root problem, and this, I should point out, this property is not, this is pretty heavy, steep canyonland stuff. It's not highly grazable areas. There are some productive spots on it, but in general, it's pretty low productivity. And so the only difference is access by livestock. And there was no rest given. This area is now grazable, right? A little bit at least. This area, while it's seen grazing continuously, is not. This, even 10 years after, one, we had to come in and retreat because we're getting reinvasion. We got almost no reinvasion here. We had to come in and retreat, and even 10 years after, it didn't look anything like this. And so without removing that root cause of the issue, we didn't get the results we wanted. But it was a really good lesson for this landowner and informed a lot of what we did going forward. And that's it. That's all I've got. I'm happy to take any questions,
Yes,
but y'all may want to go eat.
We have time for questions, I think. Yeah.
Yep. So it depends on which area. Some of the ones I showed you, multiple areas where you may use that slash for erosion. So you could, if you're going to do a whole bunch at once and you want to spread that credit out, there are ways to do it. But in the simplest scenario where I'm doing brush management on an annual basis, I'm going to be retaining slash on an annual basis too. And so I'm getting credit for those both years. The simplest answer to your question is yes. If I just go out once, do brush management, lay slash, and leave it, it is a 1 year activity. I'm only going to get credit that year. But when I go back and do my next 10% next year, I'm going to have more slash to use. And I may use it for brush piles, or I may use it for some other avenue. But yeah, it's not as, brush piles and slash are a little different in that it's not as long as they're functional. Because the program is activity-based. It's entirely activity-based. What are you doing this year? And while there are some 10-year activities, most of them are annual things. And so you do need to continue to show that active use year after year. It's actually one of the things that keeps people engaged in doing stuff on their property. And I think that's actually important. It's part of its success. So.
Yeah, the question when you chip brush piles, what category are those chips? Did you say it was habitat control or
Oh, if you're mulching up brush piles? Yeah. So what I typically do with that is hopefully you're spreading that mulch and not leaving a big old pile. But if you're spreading that mulch, I typically count that under something like slash retention. You could, depending on the site, you may use it under that plant establishment on critical areas, right, for erosion control purposes specifically. So I think there's a couple of places you could count it. Yeah. Yeah. As long as you don't leave it in a big pile. That doesn't, it doesn't do much for anybody. So. Yeah.
Can you go over the credit system kind of briefly and how that applies and how they spread out?
Yeah, so in its simplest form, there are, do I have time to answer this question?
I think this is probably going to be the last one. Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to talk to anybody during lunch. In simplest, it is, so the law prescribes those 7 categories. And Parks and Wildlife is tasked with writing guidelines that specify what activities, what practices actually count in each of these categories. And there's 50 plus different practices, right? Most of those categories have 7, 8, 9 things in them you can choose from. Not all are applicable on every property. Some of them are much shorter, 3 or 4 practices within those categories. You have to do at least one thing across 3 different categories each year. Okay, so you can't do all 3 things in habitat control. You do have to spread it out. But as I showed you, at least with Ashe Juniper, there's a lot of flexibility in how you apply those things. The one thing I didn't say, you can't double or triple dip. I can't say, I'm going to count this as brush management, and I'm going to count it as this, and I'm going to count it over here. You do have to, but you may have different projects that you count in different places. That can work too. So there is a little bit of an art to it sometimes too. So thank you all very
good.
much.
Thank you.